And so it begins at long last. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the debut album from Autechre, Incunabula. I'm still pronouncing it Autechre, I don't care. Well, we're finally doing this. I'm doing an entire series on Sean Booth and Rob Brown, by popular demand. This is obviously not my first time talking about these guys before. I did do reviews of LSEC 1 through 5 and the NTS sessions in the years they came out. The former video is my most popular review I've ever posted. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with my typical stance on these guys, but since this will be the beginning of a playlist and may or may not be people's first exposure to my thoughts on these guys, basically, I like them a lot and have a ton of respect for them. I think they're easily interesting enough and give me enough to say to merit an in-depth series, and I've always really appreciated them for their unmistakable sound design and constant experimentation and consistently staying ahead of the curve. I think it would be pushing it to say that I considered myself a fan, though. Well, I suppose that depends on how elitist you want to be when you define fan, but I am a fairly surface-level fan of this duo myself. While there are definite exceptions, they've never really done much for me on like an emotional level in general, and I'm rarely in the mood to listen to them on my own time. I'm glad whenever I do. There are some albums that I enjoy every time I put them on, just doesn't happen super often. But on the other hand, I am well aware that these guys have a massive fan base of people who take them ultra seriously, and have made it clear that they do get a big emotional response out of all their music, and including the albums of theirs that don't resonate as strongly for me. Especially those. Like I said, this series gets requested very often. They're one of the big influential linchpins of electronic music and IDM that I hadn't covered yet on year 5 of running this channel. And having already covered the full discographies of Aphex Twin, Boards of Canada, Square Pusher, Orbital, they're not really IDM, but etc., I would have to cover these guys eventually. It was kind of inevitable. Though I had a feeling shortly after my LSEC review blew up and I discovered a side of the fanbase who were, let's say, not happy to find me not taking them seriously enough, that I was gonna have to wait a few years before I actually went through with the series. Give myself more time to practice reviewing, get better at elaborating my thoughts. No guarantee these are all going to be perfectly elaborated or anything, but yeah, I think I'm finally ready to just get these all out of the way. The NTS Sessions review went over a lot better despite my enjoying that project significantly less than LSEC, so I guess we'll see how this goes. There are gonna be opinions expressed in this series that some serious fans may not be happy to hear, but they're gonna have to deal with it. For instance, the album I'm covering in this video, their debut album from 1993, is my personal favorite album from them overall. Yep, it's all downhill from here, folks. So, okay, I suppose it's time to give some background on Incunabula in particular, and why I would understand the people who would find this a contentious pick for their best album. I've talked about the artificial intelligence sound before. Basically, it is this style of laid-back ambient techno and IDM that is very easily recognizable from the series of 8 releases that Warp Records compiled together called the Artificial Intelligence series. And that sound that was exemplified in this series was completely done to death. It's one of the few styles from this era of the 90s that you just can't impress me with anymore. It feels so inherently dated. Not to say there aren't projects in this style I still enjoy. Speedy J's Ginger, Cabaret Voltaire's The Conversation, Ken Ishii's Jelly Tones, Biosphere's Microgravity, to name just a few. 8592 if you count that one. But I can't hear a new project in this style anymore and be impressed by it. You gotta do something more with this style. And Incunabula doesn't just follow the sound to a T with no strings attached. It's literally an official volume in Warp Records' Artificial Intelligence series. The 7th one to be exact. It's by far the trendiest thing this duo has ever done and feels really uncharacteristic when you come back to it after their later projects. It's their least timeless project and arguably their least creative as well. But nah, still my favorite album from these guys. It's again one of the big exceptions to my lack of enthusiasm for the artificial intelligence sound, one of the go-to examples of why this sound was so commonplace then to begin with. It's probably my favorite release in the original Warp series. finally beat out Speedy J's Ginger. Came back to that one. It's still really good, but I think this is better. Well, there's not much to it sonically to set itself apart from other releases in this style. It's just done so consistently well that I don't really care. These tracks are all memorable. They're atmospheric but still danceable. They can transcend their inherent datedness. One of the only projects in this style that just got better and better with repeat listens, and one of the only projects from Autechre that gets a legit emotional reaction out of me. Certainly the one that gets the strongest reaction out of me. Incunabula still absolutely holds up, and you cannot convince me otherwise. So yeah, may as well go down track by track. So it's always good for an album to have a good intro to let you know what you're getting into, and in the case of this album, we got Calpul Intro. 3-minute cut that admittedly feels a lot shorter than it really is, but it definitely gets me in the right mood to get into this album. All those squelchy, bassy synths, ow, wow, 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 going up against melodic pads and steamy, airy percussion just hissing all over the place. It sounds like the big ambient techno machine is booting up, and then it starts running with Bike, which, you know, not a lot to this track, mostly a pretty simple melody over some 8/0 beats. But that melody is so iconic and memorable, those 808s just come together really smoothly and sound great. There's a change up a bit before the 4-minute mark into these other synth patterns that are all bubbly and warm and fill up the whole mix in a really satisfying way. Oh yeah, and it's almost 9 minutes long and doesn't feel nearly that length. Zips by really quickly. Most tracks on here have a similar blend and mood to that of Bike, to the point of this album kind of blending together a bit. But they do all have their own identity. Autriche, for instance, has a similar deep and mysterious pad running through most of it, while unintelligible vocal samples play in the distance like an automatic subway intercom, and its quirky lead melody plays in the forefront. Low-key track, but still memorable. Broncos 2 is another 3-minute interlude that doesn't have much more to it than its drippy, reverb-soaked percussion, and these wheezing lead synth chords that are barely chords at all, they're rather discordant. Spooky track that's also pretty low-key and tends to fall into the background more often, but still good stuff. Then we got Basscadet, which is the hardest hitting percussion tracks on the album, with these drum machine bongos going up against these clattering metallic noises of various pitches. The percussion seems to call more of your attention than any of the subtle synths or garbled voices in between the drumming, but still, it's a definite banger. Eggshell is a track that didn't always stick out to me, but it did become more memorable when I figured out that it was a remake of a track that they contributed to the original Warp Records Artificial Intelligence compilation, the track called The Egg. And once I recognized that main lead synth melody, it just started to grow on me more and more. This track can maybe get a bit repetitive at 9 minutes, but I don't know, these synth patterns never really wear out their welcome for me. And they introduce other synth patterns that harmonize well with that main ostinato. It's more addicting than one would expect. Unfortunately, then we hit the album's single weakest spot, Doctrine. This track isn't even that bad either. Has some nice shuffling and foot-tapping beats that do slap, almost literally, and squelchy acid leads, but nothing about this track really sticks out in the track listing. I never skip it, but I rarely notice it's there. It blends in too well with the surrounding tracks. It doesn't bang as hard as Basscadet, but nor does it have any particularly memorable melodic riffs. Its main melody is just a single note played on an acid synth over and over. But whatever, that also speaks to how well the album flows. I mean, it's obviously not a continuous mix or anything, but these tracks very much feel like they belong together and blend into one another. The following track, Maetl, fares better with its catchy harpsichord-esque bassline and clanging, not really cowbell percussion. And the album ends with 3 of its highest points. The 11-minute dramatic ambient journey of Windwind submerges you in a vast sea of watery pads. Excellent stuff. And then Lowride. That's easily my most listened to Autechre track ever. And has some of their most memorable melodic riffs too. And those piano loops are so nice and jazzy, they gave me some Sounds from the Ground vibes. Yeah, absolutely love this track. And then we get our big climactic finish with 444, the biggest banger on the album. with synth pads that fire off at a heightened intensity unlike anywhere else on the album. They have a real menacing and dramatic quality to them, and all the other textures around it really envelop me and keep me on the edge of my seat. Another excellent track, and a really satisfying way to close out the album. So yeah, that's Incunabula. The album is not short, 78 minutes total, but it zips by so quickly for me, the whole thing. I was kind of surprised to look up the total length and see that it was that long, because it really doesn't feel like it. As far as I'm concerned, this is just the perfect length for an Autechre album. It's not too short, it's not too NTS sessions. Again, I will understand the people who don't really feel this one. As I said before, it's not even close to as out of the box as most of their later releases. I mean, someone once sent me like a meme picture they found on Twitter that said, "Oh, if Incunabula is your favorite Autechre album, then you must really dislike change." And let's make it clear, I don't want these guys to make more music that sounds like this. They already have this in Amber, that's good enough. This sound, as I mentioned, was done to death in the 90s. I wouldn't really cry if I never heard another album in the same style as Incunabula ever again. That they moved away and evolved from here is a good thing. But this is still the one album from these guys that still gets some emotional resonance out of me. I am most frequently in the mood to come back to. And that's not a nostalgia thing. I first heard this album in my first year of college. It was not my first project from these guys. I'd already heard a handful of others at this point. Can't remember which ones exactly off the top of my head. I know I at least heard Amber and Chorustis before this. But Incunabula stuck with me because I can still remember the tune to pretty much every track, which is not a thing that ever happens with these guys. They don't usually even try to make tunes that can stick in your head. And once I first heard this thing, I got hooked on Bike and Lowride. The rest of the album slowly revealed itself, and now I wholeheartedly enjoy the whole thing. Most projects in this style do not age well, even other favorites of mine, but Incunabula just kept getting better and better to me. I don't know what else to say. It's just my favorite project from these guys. I still love it. I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time. And then it starts... Fuck, I bit my tongue.